Today on the minimum equipment list, we're talking bridles. Welcome back, everybody. I am Jesse. Welcome to Skyrider Limited. Today on everybody's favorite semi-regular, non-regular series, the minimum equipment list, we are talking the thing that connects us to our kite, the bridle. There are a lot of terms and a lot of things that get thrown around when people are talking to bridles, and it can be really confusing. And I've heard recently from some friends with kite shops and friends around kiting that there have been a lot of questions about it recently, so I wanted to take a crack at demystifying that for all of you. Especially when we look at like the long history of kiting, there have been a lot of different types of bridles, and each one comes with its own set of ideas and terms. I think it's really important to note here that this is me trying to demystify the bridle, not me trying to teach you how to build and design bridles or adjust them. Think of this as a visual glossary of terms. And with that in mind, I think we should dive right in and start talking about the parts of a bridle. So, most everything we're going to talk about here today will be primarily for dual line kites and for delta wing dual line kites, like my little example kite here, which will be a lot more useful as we go on. Some of it will apply to all kites, but at least for the most part, we're going to focus on dual line. The simplest types of bridles are bridles that are direct connection points between the flying line and the frame. We don't see that a lot in dual line kites, but in quad, particularly in indoor quad line kites, you see that where the flying line is connected to just a little pigtail of line attached directly to the frame somewhere. That's going to exert the most direct control on the kite, and like I said, be the simplest form of bridle. As far as dual line bridles go, which is where we're going to spend most of our focus, we're going to lump them into two categories, and that's direct control bridles and active bridles or modifier bridles. It is important to understand, though, a bunch of key terms that apply to all of them. So, what the bridle is doing is warping the wing of the kite, like the Wright brothers figured out for airplanes, and allowing us to exert control over the kite, right? So, the first thing we need to understand about that is a term called angle of attack. Now, in an airplane wing, angle of attack is the angle between the wing's chord line and the relative wind. In a kite, the angle of attack is the angle at which the kite is held against the wind. You can have a nose back angle of attack or a nose forward angle of attack. Nose forward is going to bleed more air pressure down. It will be faster and less pull. Nose back is going to hold more wind, which means it'll fly lower but with less drive. You have more sail pressure in a nose back position. That's something that is going to the range of that is going to be set by the designer and the bridle. And then you may have some adjustments. Usually they're at our upper spreader connection points. Every once in a while, you'll see them down to the center T. The original Prism Eclipse, for example, had angle of attack adjustments at that center T position. All right, so let's talk about bridle parts. In the most basic bridle we see on a delta wing stunt kite, there are three legs, and those are the uphaul, the outhaul, and the inhaul. Those all come together at the toe point, and then on newer kites, we have a leader, sometimes also called a pigtail, and that's what goes from the toe point on the bridle to your flying line. Additionally, we may also have a keeper leg. So the keeper leg is going to run from somewhere on the uphaul, frequently all the way up at the connection to the upper spreader area, to the middle of the inhaul, and prevents the inhaul from getting caught on the tail of the kite. When inhauls go slack, they can catch the tail end of your spine and cause the kite to sort of fall out of the sky. So keeper legs have become popular as a way to prevent that. Not all bridles will have keeper legs. So now that we've gone through those terms, I think it's important that we discuss um, what changes in bridles can do and some other terms you may hear thrown around with bridles. Um, we talked about the components of the bridles. So the next thing to understand is toe points. Toe points can move. You can have a high toe point, one that when you visually look at the kite with the bridle intention sits up here, or a low toe point. And in newer kites, that toe point can even fall below the lower spreaders. High versus low toe points are going to change that engagement and feel of the kite, as well as that drive characteristic. You can also have a wide or an inset toe point. When we talk about wide or inset, we're talking about the toe point's relative position between the spine of the kite and the outside. Wide is going to be out towards your leading edge, inset towards the spine. Wider toe points add stability and can help with kites rotating on their back, whereas inset is going to be a very direct feeling bridle. Higher is going to be, like I said before, faster and have lower pull. Low is going to have more load. The wide bridles tend to be French, and like I said, they sort of aid with that pitch and backspin. Inset has a fast spin and rotation. The kite can feel very crisp or radical, which is another term we hear a lot, which basically just means oversteer. So then the last terms are tight versus loose that we hear a lot, sometimes also called compressed and uncompressed. And that's how long the bridle is. A loose or uncompressed bridle sits farther away from the kite versus a tight bridle, which sits very close. Tighter bridles tend to be more popular on low wind kites. Looser bridles can help deaden input in high wind situations. So that high connected, tight feeling versus a softer, longer input for that loose feeling. So those are those first few terms that we needed to sort of get around before we can start talking about bridles. At the top, I said there were two basic families. We're going to start with the direct control bridles. And the most common of that is the 3-point bridle. So the 3-point bridle, which I've already shown you on the screen as we were going through the components of a bridle, has an in-haul, an up-haul, and an out-haul. That's it. All three of those points come together at one nexus, and then the leader goes off from there to the line. Now, the in-haul generally will connect at the center tee, but sometimes you'll see a bridle that is what we call a cross 3-point, where it connects to the opposite side, lower spreader. You can also have a kite with an in-haul that connects to the lower spreader on the same side. For example, I think the Alpha Kites TNT has lower spreader connections like that. There are also 4-point bridles, which again use a joined nexus like that. In the 90s, we saw a number of 4-point bridles with a mid-haul that joins roughly at the midpoint between the upper spreader and lower spreader on the leading edge. There's also a cross 4-point, which showed up on kites like the Weldon Aerolab Synchro. And that bridle goes the same as a 3-point, but it features an additional leg going to the opposite lower spreader. Those are the majority of configurations for the direct bridles that you'll see. And they offer a precise direct feedback that a lot of flyers really like and can be very good for freestyle performance as a result. So that brings us to the active bridles. There are a couple of families within that. There are the turbo bridles, turbo and reverse turbo. And then there are the others, dihedral, trihedral, tri-star, and of course, cross-active. And then there are some bridles that we're just going to call others, which sort of defy categorization. But let's start with the most common for the longest time, which is the turbo bridle. So here on the screen, you can see the turbo bridle, and you can see that turbo leg. That turbo leg is going to modify two legs, and it is going to change the balance between the three standard legs of the bridle. The length of that turbo leg is going to change the influence ratio. Um, Turbos tend to be used to bring that toe point inward, and it creates a very snappy feel. The kite becomes overstable in a fade, but very hard to backspin as a result. Um, they are more active in flight, and you get sort of an active AOA change, angle of attack change, as a result. Some notable examples of turbos through the year. Um, the FlexiFoil Matrix actually was available with both a 3-point and a turbo bridle, and it had a very loose turbo bridle, very, very long. The Cavalier Styx and STX family were turbos. Um, those are sort of some kites that I have a lot of personal experience with, but I'm sure that you can all think of a kite with a turbo bridle in your life. So from there, that brings us to reverse turbo bridles. Reverse turbo bridle still uses that turbo modifier leg, but it moves us to a different balance by modifying different legs on the bridle. Um, that bridle is going to be more inward when the kite's on its back, more outward when it's in a fade. That's going to take away some of that overstable fade behavior and make the kite easier to backspin, easier to rotate. The bridle tends to be found on newer, more freestyle oriented kites, but does show up on a number of ballet kites as well. I would say it's least common at this point on team kites, though it has been done. Um, so those are those big families. Now let's talk about some of the less common um, active bridles, but that have been out there, and those would be mostly found on British kites. In particular, we're going to talk about Bensons here quite a lot, and those would be dihedral, which was found on the Phantom Elites, trihedral, TriStar, and the Cross Active, which all at one point or another I think were found on the Gemini. So as we go into these more active bridles, I think it's important to talk specifically about the activator leg. So the activator leg is going to be an additional piece of bridle line joining two or more of the main bridle legs. And when the kite changes orientation, it's going to exert force on those bridle legs and change their relative engagement. The standard active bridle can be quite tricky, and so a lot of designers don't use it. But it has been used and to reasonable success, though, particularly when we get to like the cross active bridle, uh, when we get further down this, that bridle was on the Benson Gemini, but it's gone away as the kite has evolved and gone to, I think the kite is a TriStar now. But all of this information, all of these active bridles, again, because they are Benson related, are also Andy Wardley related. And Andy has a wonderful website with really, really in depth descriptions, as well as some of the measurements for some of these old bridles, specifically for these older, older builds of freestyle and precision Bensons. And if you are really, really curious, highly recommend you check out Andy's site. That is great. As far as the turbo and reverse turbo bridles, if you want to see some different bridle configurations on the same kite there, I think it's also a good place that I will note here. One of the kites that had actually pretty much all three configurations, 3-point reverse turbo and turbo, was the Nirvana by R Sky. And Reed Design, another website you can check out, has some great tech documents on that site that have the stock R Sky bridles, as well as Debray bridles and a few other people's modified Nirvana bridles that you can definitely check out and see the differences there. Um, but from that point, from that active bridle, we now move into that dihedral active bridle. The dihedral active bridle has a stabilizer leg and an activator leg. That's the die, or two in this case. Uh, that bridle was used to exert more precise control on larger kites like the Phantom Elite. It is generally going to have that activator leg between the in-haul and up-haul, and that stabilizer leg separating, pardon me while I grab some more notes, separating the toe point and up-haul from where the in-haul and out-haul come together. Um, that bridle is going to create a higher, more stable toe point while still allowing for that more direct connection at times and in certain orientations by way of that activator leg. That bridle gave way to the trihedral, which then has activator legs joining all three bridle legs of a standard tri-point. So here we have that trihedral bridle with the three activator legs creating a compression in the middle of the main legs and creating sort of a pyramid structure, a three-sided pyramid structure, if you will, out of the end of those legs to the toe point. That bridle is going to, depending on the balance of activators, exert different forces and different attitudes on each bridle leg, causing dynamic changes in flight. Um, it gave way to a TriStar, which uses three legs joining together, pulling in to a common point, and then that pyramid to the toe point. And that bridle, again, has an active influence on each leg depending on orientation, but is considered easier to adjust and design. Each one of these bridles in the active family here, from the active to the dihedral to the trihedral to the TriStar, get harder to construct, but easier to adjust, which is why the progression. Probably the most complex of this family, though, is the cross active bridle. The cross active is a 3-point bridle with an activator leg, in this case between the in haul and up haul, and then a leg that reaches across between the activator of each side. It was found on the Benson Gemini, which is a very unique sport kite featuring twin spines and an additional standoff in the middle between the spines, pushing it away. Um, it the active cross leg allowed the kite to have influence over both bridles at the same time and made it pretty wild to fly. Triple axles and some pretty wild freestyle things. But over time, that bridle gave way back to a TriStar, which kept a lot of the kite's freestyle ability, but made it a little bit more manageable in a straight line. Um, this is definitely one of the wilder bridles. Probably the most wild bridle I can think of belongs to the Elliott La Luna. And I have a picture here for you. This bridle had lower spreader legs. It had a pigtail leg from a nexus at the spine to where all the in-haul legs join. It has activator legs, it has stabilizer legs, and it has a turbo leg. It is all of the bridles. It is a headache. Thankfully, most designers don't do things like this, but we do see other sorts of activators. Um, Lamb Hawk uses a leg called a crow's foot from time to time. A crow's foot goes So generally, your outhaul is joining the kite somewhere at or below the outer spreader fitting. So the crow's foot is going to join above the lower spreader fitting to that outhaul, and it allows for a change in connection point as far as activity and outhaul length, moving that toe point when the kite changes orientation. Paul DeBacher did something similar on the Jinx with a leg that held the in-haul in tension when the kite was in its normal flight orientation. But when the kite was on its back, it released and changed the toe point with gaining better stability from an otherwise unstable position. This is a lot of information to take in. And I'm going to leave you with a few more nuggets about bridle and bridle construction, but I want to be very clear that this video was not meant to help you design a bridle, just to demystify the bridles that are out there. One thing that I think a lot of people don't realize the importance of is the weight of the bridle line. When a designer designs a bridle with a specific weight of bridle line, that is part of setting the angle of attack, since heavier bridle line will pull down like heavier lines on the top of the kite versus lighter bridle line, which the kite will have an easier time supporting, which will create more nose away. A good example of this is Carl Robichaux's bridle on the Fury, which is made of incredibly heavy cord bridle line that pulls that nose forward, creating a lot of drive, but a very dynamic speed control in that kite. Versus some ultralights and SULs where we want to let the nose fall back using a lighter bridle cord, for example, the SUL Fury, allowing that kite to settle backwards and hold more air. I hope all of this helps with the mystery of bridles. I am going to link those websites that I mentioned, as well as a couple of other resources in the description of this video. Please, as always, if you have questions about this, reach out to me on the various platforms or in the comments section below. Thank you so much for watching, liking, subscribing, sharing. I really do hope this video helps clear up some of the mysteries of bridles for you. And at some point, maybe we'll do one for quad line bridles and maybe even some single line bridles someday. Let me know if you'd like to see that in the comments, and we will see you out there, Skyrider.